The plague doctor was not a hero. He was a warning that the city had already surrendered. Before he ever reached your door, the street was already dead. Not empty, dead. Shutters sealed like coffins, doorways marked with chalk and strange symbols meant to keep sickness out, and sometimes meant to keep people in. The air carried a sour, wet stench that clung to cloth and hair. Even the rats moved differently, bold and slow as if they had inherited the roads. And then you heard it. A bell, faint at first, then closer. Not a church bell. A handbell rung by someone walking the streets to announce that death was now official. They didn't tell you this in the paintings. The Black Death did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like an audit, quiet, methodical, unstoppable. And once it began, mercy was a lie. Imagine standing in a medieval town at dawn. The stone walls sweat from cold mist, the gutters overflow with filth. The market square, once loud with bargaining and laughter, holds only a few figures, silent, watching each other like animals, deciding whether to flee or fight. You smell wood smoke, stale beer, dung, and beneath it all, a faint sweetness that should not be there. The sweetness of rot. A cart creaks over uneven cobbles, its wheels grind like teeth, and behind it, a man in a long coat, face hidden, carrying a stick so he doesn't have to touch anyone. The plague doctor is coming. This is the first unsettling truth. The Black Death was not simply a disease. It was a collapse of human trust. It made neighbors dangerous. It made kindness reckless. It made love a liability. The moment the sickness appeared, the rules of society inverted. A man could be rich in the morning and abandoned by night. A mother could beg for help and be treated like a criminal. A priest could offer prayers and still be driven away with stones. Because the plague did not just kill bodies, it tore apart the meaning of being human. When it reached Europe in the mid-14th century, it moved like an invisible army. It traveled along trade routes, inside ships in cloth bundles, in grain sacks, in the hidden nests of rats and fleas. It followed wealth. It followed commerce. It followed the very roads that civilization was proud of building. The same ports that brought silk and spices also brought a sentence of death. And it did not negotiate. It didn't arrive with banners or warning drums. It arrived in barrels, in cargo holds, in the shadows of harbors where men laughed and drank and never suspected they were standing beside their own graves. One day a sailor coughs. A week later, an entire street is silent. And then the city understands something too late. The world has changed. There is a reason the plague still haunts human memory. It wasn't one of history's tragedies. It was history's brutality made visible, a force so total that it didn't just destroy people, it destroyed normal life. And it did it in plain sight. There are stories about where it began, but the most chilling truth is that it didn't matter. Whether it started in Central Asia, in the Mongol steppe, or in distant trade cities, it eventually found the same road into Europe: commerce. Because medieval Europe was connected, not modern connected, but enough. Enough that the same ships that brought luxury could also bring death. And death always traveled first class. Picture a port city on the Mediterranean. The water is dark, thick with salt. The smell of fish and tar fills the air. Dock workers shout. Merchants argue. Sailors unload crates marked with foreign symbols. A ship arrives from the east. Its sails hang limp like tired skin. Its crew looks wrong. Pale faces, hollow eyes, hands shaking as they tie ropes. Some don't speak at all. They simply stare as if they have already crossed into another world. And then someone collapses onto the dock. Not from drunkenness, not from exhaustion, but from fever, from something that makes the body fail and die always. The authorities might hesitate. They might pray. They might argue about what to do. But by the time anyone decides, the fleas have already jumped. The rats have already escaped. And the city has already been marked. The Black Death did not strike like a sword. It spread like smoke. You couldn't see it. You couldn't fight it. You couldn't bargain with it. You could only wait. And waiting became torture. People imagined the plague as one thing, one sickness, one pattern. But it wasn't that simple. There were forms of it that killed in days and forms of it that killed in hours. Some victims developed buboes, swollen lumps under the arms and the groin along the neck. The skin around them turned bruised and dark. The pain was not gentle. It was a deep, burning ache, as if the body itself was inflamed with rage. Others coughed blood, not just a little, not a polite stain in a cloth. Thick, warm blood sprayed from the lungs like something ruptured from inside. And if you coughed blood, everyone knew what it meant. You were already dead. The pneumonic form spread through breath. That meant it didn't need rats, it didn't need fleas, it didn't need filth or crowded streets, it only needed you. A cough in a church and a whisper in a market and a shared cup of water, and then it moved from body to body like a curse. There were stories of people waking up healthy and dying by nightfall. Stories of men walking to the well, collapsing halfway and being dead before anyone could even decide whether to touch them. The plague taught Europe something that terrified it more than death itself. That life could end without warning. That death did not have to be earned. That it could simply arrive. And when people realized that, the panic was immediate. At first, people tried to behave normally. They went to market, they attended church, they kissed their children goodnight without fear. They believed, as humans always do, that catastrophe happens to someone else. Then the coughing began, then fever, then the swollen lumps, and then the screams. And then the city changed. You can almost hear it. The sound of work fades. The hammering of metal stops. The rhythm of carts and footsteps thins. Doors close. Dogs bark at shadows. Church bells ring more often, not for celebration but for funerals. So many funerals that the ringing becomes background noise. And then even the bells begin to stop, because the bell ringers are gone. This is another unsettling reality. The Black Death did not only kill the weak, it killed the people who held society together. It killed craftsmen, scribes, bakers, midwives, monks. It killed the ones who knew how to run the world. And when they fell, knowledge vanished with them. A town could lose its memory in a month. In the middle of this, the plague doctor steps forward, dressed in protective clothing that looks almost theatrical. A long waxed coat, gloves, boots, and the famous mask with a beak. The beak was not decoration. It was a filter packed with herbs, rosemary, cloves, lavender, anything that smelled strong enough to fight the invisible poison of the air. Because that was the medieval explanation. Miasma, bad air, corrupted wind, a sickness carried by smell. So they fought smell with smell. And it is almost tragic because they were not entirely foolish. They sensed the truth in the only language they had. They knew something in the environment was wrong. They knew the air itself felt contaminated. They knew the city had become a trap, but their solutions were often brutal and misguided. Here is a truth worth remembering. When the plague arrived, the first thing Europe tried to cure was not the disease. It was the panic. People fled cities carrying infection with them. They abandoned sick relatives. They left children behind. They walked into the countryside like refugees from an invisible war. And cities responded with iron law. Quarantine was born in terror, not as a polite medical measure, but as a harsh economic decision. Some ports forced ships to wait offshore for weeks before docking. Some towns barred travelers entirely. Guards were posted at gates. Merchants were questioned like criminals. If you came from the wrong place, you were condemned before you spoke. Imagine a traveler arriving at a city wall. His boots are cracked from miles of walking. His clothes smell of sweat and road dust. He holds out a paper seal, proof he has permission to enter. But the guard does not step closer. The guard keeps distance, spear pointed, eyes narrowed. The traveler coughs once, and the air changes. The guard signals, others appear. The gate stays shut. The traveler tries to explain, but explanation means nothing. The law is simple now. Suspicion is guilt. He is turned away. Maybe he survives. Maybe he collapses in the ditch outside the walls where no one will touch him. This is the plague's true brutality. It turned human beings into hazards, and while the poor were hunted by suspicion, the rich tried to buy distance. Wealthy families escaped to country villas. They sealed themselves away with servants and food stores. They paid for private priests. They paid for private doctors. They paid for silence. But even wealth had limits because the plague did not respect gold. It respected proximity. Now the city begins to mutate into something else. Markets are restricted. Taverns are closed. Gatherings are banned. Some authorities ordered that no one should walk at night. Some towns demanded that the sick be separated from the healthy. And that sounds reasonable until you realize what it meant in practice. It meant families were torn apart. It meant a father could be dragged from his bed and carried away, not because he was proven infected, but because he had a fever and the neighborhood demanded action. It meant a child could be left screaming behind a door while strangers nailed it shut. In some places, houses were marked, and those inside were effectively imprisoned. Food might be left outside. Sometimes it was not. The line between quarantine and punishment was thin, and it often vanished completely. A plague doctor might be called to inspect the sick. He would enter a home that smelled of sweat and damp straw. The air would be thick with herbal smoke. A candle would flicker, casting trembling shadows on the walls. The family would stand back, faces pale, eyes wide, terrified not only of death, but of what might happen if the doctor confirmed it. Because a diagnosis was not just medical, and it was legal. If the doctor declared plague, your household could be isolated, your property could be seized. Your neighbors could refuse to trade with you. Your name could become poison, and the doctor might not even touch the patient. He might lift a blanket with a wooden cane. He might inspect swollen skin from a distance. He might ask questions in a cold voice, already thinking of the city's regulations, already thinking of the paperwork that follows death. And then he would speak the words, and the family would know the world outside had vanished. Here is another truth that feels almost too cold to say out loud. Death became administration, not because the people stopped caring, but because caring was too expensive. If you mourned everybody, you would go mad. So the city learned to process the dead the way it processed grain and meat, quickly, efficiently, without ceremony. In some cities, a third of the population vanished, in others half. In the worst-hit places, it was as if the town had been erased with a dirty hand. Entire families disappeared so completely that no one remained to inherit their homes. Houses sat locked and rotting, their contents untouched, as if the owners might return. They never returned. There were moments when so many people died that normal burial collapsed. Not because of cruelty, but because the living simply could not keep up. Graveyards filled, priests ran out of breath, coffins became a luxury. Bodies were stacked, covered with earth, and forgotten quickly, not because they were unloved, but because survival demanded speed. Imagine the smell, not a faint odor, not a mild decay, a thick, nauseating stench that sank into the stones of the city itself. It clung to clothes, it clung to hair, it clung to prayer. And even when the wind changed, it returned, because the city was now saturated with death. This is when the plague doctor becomes a symbol, not of healing, of inevitability. His presence meant the system had shifted from prevention to management, from saving people to counting them. Many plague doctors were trained physicians, many were not. Some were desperate men who took the job because it paid. Some were frauds who saw profit in panic. Some were simply unlucky men trapped in a job no one else wanted. But they all carried the same message. The city had entered its final phase. The plague doctor was not a miracle worker. He was a functionary, a public tool, and in the middle of the chaos, medieval medicine did what it always did. It performed. Because when people are terrified, they demand ritual. They demand something that looks like control. Doctors prescribed bloodletting, believing excess humors needed release. They recommended purging. They offered mixtures of herbs and minerals, some harmless, some toxic. They advised patients to avoid cold air, to avoid baths, to avoid sex, to avoid anything pleasurable because pleasure was suspicious. They lanced buboes, releasing pus and blood, often spreading infection further. They burned aromatic woods and herbs, hoping the air itself could be purified. They carried theriac, an expensive concoction believed to be a universal antidote, made from dozens of ingredients and sometimes including opium. But the truth was simple. Most treatments did nothing. Some treatments accelerated death. And the plague kept moving. The people, meanwhile, turned to religion with desperation. Churches filled at first. Crowds gathered in prayer, believing that if they begged hard enough, God would lift the curse. They held processions. They carried relics. They marched through streets chanting hymns. And then they began dying in the processions. Because the plague didn't care what you believed. A crowded church was a perfect breeding ground. A mass gathering was a gift to the infection. And soon the churches emptied again, not from lack of faith, but from fear. Priests died in enormous numbers because they continued to administer last rites, continued to enter infected homes, continued to stand near the dying. Some clergy fled, some stayed and died. And the survivors were often young, untrained men rushed into holy roles too quickly, overwhelmed by responsibility and terror. The authority of the church cracked. People saw holy men die like anyone else. They saw prayers fail. They saw the cross offer no protection. And in that vacuum, strange movements emerged. Groups of flagellants marched from town to town, whipping themselves in public, believing that pain would purify the world. Their bodies bled through cloth. Their faces were hollow. Their eyes were feverish with certainty. They believed God demanded suffering. And the crowd watched them with fascination because suffering at least felt like action. This is one of history's ugliest truths. When medicine fails, spectacle becomes medicine, and fear becomes religion. But fear also needs someone to blame, because an invisible enemy is unbearable. If you can't see the threat, you can't fight it. So people created targets. Rumors spread that the disease was not natural, that someone had caused it, that wells had been poisoned, that strangers had brought it deliberately, that certain groups were responsible. Fear needs a face, and once fear finds one, it becomes permission. Minority communities, especially Jewish communities in parts of Europe, were accused of poisoning water supplies and conspiring with evil forces. These accusations were not based on evidence. They were based on desperation. And in the plague years, murder could be committed in broad daylight and justified as public safety. Brutality became a civic duty. Imagine the scene in a town square. A crowd gathers under gray skies. The air is cold enough to sting the throat. People wear scarves soaked in vinegar or stuffed with herbs, convinced it will protect them. Their eyes are hard. Their faces are tight with hunger and suspicion. Someone is dragged forward, accused of spreading the sickness. There is no trial worth the name. There is no careful investigation. The crowd does not want truth, it wants relief. And relief in that moment looks like punishment. A rope is produced, a fire is prepared. The crowd does not cheer with joy. It murmurs with the quiet satisfaction of people who believe they are saving themselves. And when it is done, the plague remains because the plague never cared who you blamed. Here is a line worth remembering. The Black Death taught Europe that innocence was not protection. It taught people that morality did not stop infection. It taught them that prayers did not block bacteria. It taught them that the world could become unfair overnight, and once people accept that, they change. Kindness becomes rare, empathy becomes expensive. A neighbor coughing becomes an enemy. A stranger becomes a threat. A friend becomes a liability. The plague did not just infect bodies, it infected society, and it created a new psychology. Survival thinking, the logic of the hunted. Families hid sickness to avoid being sealed inside. People lied about relatives' deaths to protect property. Some fled at the first sign of danger, leaving servants and poor tenants behind like discarded tools. And yet, paradoxically, the plague also created opportunity. Because when laborers died, wages rose for survivors. When landowners lost tenants, they begged for workers. Entire social structures cracked. Some peasants suddenly had leverage they had never imagined. And the ruling classes panicked. They responded with laws designed to freeze society in place, to prevent workers from demanding more, to keep the old order alive even as bodies piled up. It was a blood-soaked economy where death created opportunity, and opportunity was treated like rebellion. The plague did not just kill, it rearranged power. And it did it without permission. Now imagine the plague doctor again walking through the streets. His coat is waxed and stiff, his gloves are dark, his beaked mask is stuffed with herbs. His eyes are glass. He doesn't look like a man. He looks like an omen. And that is not accidental. The plague doctor became theater. His outfit was designed to intimidate the disease, yes, but also to intimidate the living. He is meant to look untouchable. He is meant to represent control. Because in a city where everything is collapsing, the image of control becomes a form of currency. He walks with measured steps, and his mask hides his expression. His cane keeps distance not only from the sick, but from desperate hands reaching for help. He does not look like mercy. He looks like procedure. And midway through this story comes the darker truth that recontextualizes everything. The plague doctor was often less a healer and more a bureaucrat of death. His job was not primarily to save you. It was to classify you, to record the dead, to certify causes, to advise authorities on containment, to decide which homes should be sealed, which bodies should be removed, which streets should be avoided. He was an instrument of the city's survival, not the individual's. And that is the coldest kind of medicine, because when the system is threatened, the individual becomes expendable in plain sight. Picture a narrow alley behind the market. The stones are slick with rain. A thin layer of refuse clings to the ground. The smell is unbearable. Old meat, sewage, smoke, and something else. Something sweet and wrong. A woman kneels beside a doorway, rocking slightly, whispering prayers. Her hands are red from scrubbing, as if cleanliness could bargain with death. Inside the house, her husband lies on straw. His skin is hot. His breathing is shallow. His eyes are open but unfocused. The plague doctor arrives, and he does not kneel. He does not comfort. He lifts the blanket with his cane. He watches. He listens. He steps back. He says nothing for a moment. And in that silence, the woman understands the truth before it is spoken. When he finally speaks, it is not a prayer. It is not a promise. It is an order. The house will be marked. The family will be isolated. The neighbors will be warned. And the woman, still alive, becomes a prisoner of a diagnosis. That is the hidden machinery of plague life. The disease did not only kill people, it turned living homes into condemned spaces. Another reality is almost impossible to imagine. Some medieval towns issued ordinances regulating death itself, how bodies could be handled, how funerals could be conducted, how many people could attend. In some places, public mourning was restricted, not out of cruelty, but because gatherings meant contagion. Grief became illegal, and if grief became illegal, loneliness became policy. Now consider the men who handled the dead. Gravediggers became essential workers. Body collectors were hired to move corpses. Men who once would have been considered unclean suddenly held power because they were willing to touch what others would not. The dead were collected quickly, sometimes stripped of valuables, sometimes buried without identification. And in a world where survival was a daily negotiation, theft from corpses was not rare. It was another symptom of collapse, because when society collapses, morality doesn't disappear, it gets priced. And in many places, the poor paid the most. They lived in crowded quarters, surrounded by filth and fleas. They could not escape to countryside villas. They could not buy private doctors. They were trapped. And in medieval Europe, being trapped was often the same thing as being sentenced. Now picture a small room above a butcher's shop. The air is thick with smoke and animal fat. The walls are damp. A family sleeps in the same space where meat is stored. The father coughs. The mother listens in silence, already afraid to speak. The cough becomes worse. Fever rises. The child begins to cry. And the mother realizes something terrifying. If the neighbors hear, they will report them, and if the city hears, they will seal the door. So she covers the child's mouth, not to harm the child, to protect them. This is the kind of brutality the plague created, not open violence, quiet cruelty, the kind that happens when people are cornered. The Black Death made ordinary people do things they would have once called monstrous, because it taught them the ugliest rule of survival. If you want to live, someone else might have to die. And then, slowly, the plague begins to change the landscape itself. Fields go unplanted, food becomes scarce. Famine follows sickness like a second predator. Hunger weakens the survivors, making them more vulnerable. Weakness invites more disease. And so the cycle continues. The Black Death was not one disaster. It was a chain of disasters feeding each other. It left behind a world where even sunlight felt hostile. And when the sickness finally slowed, the survivors walked through familiar streets that felt foreign. Shops empty, churches understaffed, fields overgrown, graveyards expanded beyond their walls. And everywhere, the memory of abandonment. But the plague didn't only change cities, it changed minds. It changed how people saw reality. Because once you watch half your town disappear, you stop believing in permanence. You stop believing in stability, and you stop believing in the old promises. Even art began to change. Medieval Europe became obsessed with death. Skeletons appeared in paintings. The danse macabre, death dancing with the living, became a recurring image. Because after the plague, death was no longer hidden. It was a constant companion, a presence in every doorway, a shadow in every alley. And this is where the plague doctor's mask becomes more than a costume. It becomes a cultural scar, because the mask represents something deeper than sickness. It represents the moment civilization admits it cannot protect you. And here is the most disturbing truth of all. The plague doctor was not terrifying because he looked like death. He was terrifying because he looked like the system. He was the face of organized collapse. The moment when a city stops pretending it can save everyone. Now imagine a child in this world. He wakes to a quiet house. No morning voices, no cooking smell, only the faint scent of damp straw and old smoke. He steps outside and sees his street half empty. Doors shut, windows covered. A dog eats something in the gutter that should not be there. He hears a cart in the distance. He knows what that sound means now. Because children learned the language of death early. He watches as men carry a body wrapped in cloth. No ceremony, no music, just movement. The body is placed on the cart like cargo. The cart rolls away and the street returns to silence. This is the plague's deepest cruelty. It trained children to treat disappearance as normal. And then, finally, the sickness begins to slow. Not because humanity conquered it, but because it ran out of easy targets. Because the dead had already paid the price. Because immunity began to form in survivors. Because seasons changed. Because the invisible tide receded. But the world it left behind was not the same world. The survivors inherited a Europe full of empty homes, empty churches, and empty graves dug too quickly to remember. And they inherited a new kind of fear. Not fear of death, fear of abandonment, fear that when the next catastrophe arrives, society will not hold. It will fracture, will seal its doors, it will decide who is worth saving. And that is why the plague doctor still haunts history. Because he is not a symbol of medicine. He is a symbol of the moment compassion becomes optional. When you picture him walking through fog, bell ringing somewhere behind him, do not imagine a savior. Imagine the sound of a city quietly deciding that you are already lost. Because the true horror of the Black Death was not the disease. The true horror was how quickly people learned to live with it, and how easily they learned to let others die.